One, my parents are famous, but I can only see them on TV. They're always on the front lines of war, saying it's too dangerous, so they left me with my grandma in the countryside. Later, though, they adopted their colleague's daughter. They took her with them everywhere, making up for what they couldn't give me. She became their darling, never having to watch them behind a cold screen. When they finally remembered me, I had long ago forgotten any feelings I had for them after a high fever. I got sick, not too bad, but it dragged on for a long time. It all started with a bet between their adopted daughter and me on who could climb the mountain fastest. The winner would have them attend her parent-teacher meeting. I gave it my all and climbed to the summit, only to find my parents and their adopted daughter setting up a tent, ready to take photos of the sunrise together. She saw me and smiled, saying, "I only said who gets there first, not how you get there." She added, "Alice, don't you get it? On the same path. You have to walk to reach, but I have them lifting me up. You were losing from the start." My parents stood behind her with a camera, hearing our conversation. Realizing what happened, they awkwardly tried inviting me to watch the sunrise. But I just turned away without a second thought. "Let her go." My mom shouted angrily behind me, "Why can't she be more like Lucy? If she was as considerate as Lucy, if she wasn't always so cold, we wouldn't have overlooked her." Hearing that made me chuckle a bit. My parents said I was never soft or eager to get close to them. But in the 15 years they were absent from my life, I couldn't even meet them, let alone grow close. No one taught me how. After getting home, I got sick. Just a bit of breeze and dew. But I ran a high fever, feeling weak and dazed. Before finally passing out, I called an ambulance for myself, then fell into darkness. During that time, I revisited my childhood. When I was little, I could always see my parents on TV. Only on TV. They were famous journalists, college sweethearts, like-minded partners. After graduating, they ran tirelessly to cover important news, often going abroad to war zones, living among refugees. Before leaving, they left a photo. I was a baby, held warmly in the arms of a smiling couple. Our family happily huddled together. Little did I know, it was the last time they'd hug me. It haunted my childhood, wishing I had been wiser then, to know what it felt like to be in their arms. It would have been a memory worth cherishing forever. But that wasn't meant to be. Back then, communication wasn't as developed. I stayed with my grandma in the countryside. She couldn't really use the old phone my parents left her, so every month she'd walk miles to the town post office to check for letters. When I got older, she'd take me along. Every time, I'd dress in my best clothes and have grandma braid my hair beautifully, wearing flowers. I thought if my parents could know me through letters, I must look my best. But I never received any letter until 3rd grade, when a homework assignment from my teacher made me realize that letters only go one way. My parents wouldn't suddenly pop up at the post office to hear me talk about how much I missed them. Thankfully, though there were no letters, there was still TV. My parents, abroad for years, hadn't been home for Chinese New Year in ages. Sometimes, they'd send someone to gift appliances to Grandma's place. When a 45-inch color TV was delivered, neighbors gathered in awe. Grandma invited everyone in to watch together. Once the antenna was set, the TV was turned on, landing on the evening news. The host spoke, then the screen switched to a couple holding microphones. My eyes lit up. Those were my parents reporting from a war zone, briefly explaining the situation, urging the public to help the refugees. Seeing their aged faces compared to photos, I couldn't help but walk towards the TV. "Dad, Mom," I called out loudly, hoping for a response. From then on, watching the news became a habit. They weren't on every day, but every time they were, I had sweet dreams at night. Eventually, I went to middle school in town. By then, cell phones were becoming popular. One day after school, I found an old uncharged phone in Grandma's drawer. I charged it and found the contact with my parents' names, feeling my heart pounding. The call didn't go through. The phone bill had been unpaid for too long. Later, after saving up, I memorized their number every day. Finally, on my birthday, I gave the small shopkeeper $10 to use her phone and called the number. It rang for a long time. Just when I thought no one would pick up, that gentle male voice I often dream about came on. "Dad, I excitedly called his name and told him, "I'm your baby." But he was silent for a long time, almost like he didn't remember he had a baby back home. When he finally spoke, his voice was a bit rushed. He said, "Baby, Daddy is busy with work. I'll call you later. Listen to Grandma while you're with her." Before I could reply, he hung up. I held my phone, warmed by my ear, feeling a bit lost. It was the first conversation I remembered having with my dad. Kids have sharp instincts. That day, I suddenly realized something. My parents didn't miss me the way I'd been missing them. After that, I still couldn't kick the habit of waiting for the news on TV. But I stopped getting excited. I used to dream that I was a girl loved by her parents, thinking they wanted to see me through the screen too. But now I understood. It seemed like they didn't love me. To them, I was probably just a distant memory, a stranger. Things changed in high school. I was buried in books, aiming to enter the journalism field in college. I lived on campus, so I couldn't watch the news every day. One day after class, I saw Grandma at the classroom door, leaning on her cane. She had even dressed up a bit. When she saw me, her voice overflowed with excitement. "Baby, your mom and dad are back. Let's go meet them." My books tumbled to the ground, the world around me fading away. I was finally going to see them, not just on a cold screen. I could hug them, show them all the awards I'd earned over the years. Though I had no fancy talents, those awards for being top of my class were my pride. I wondered if they'd be proud of me. Grandma and I rushed to the station. While waiting, I fixed my hair countless times, wiped my face with wet wipes, and checked my reflection on the metal seat. I regretted not washing my hair first. I was nervous about their first impression, but argued with myself that they're my parents, they shouldn't judge. In my teenage brain, pride was budding. I thought if they could ignore me as a kid, I should be a bit aloof too. That would make us even. Grandma and I waited in vain. Late into the night at the station, Dad's friend showed up. He said Dad called. They were in the capital, and would only stay for a week. With work finishing, they wouldn't visit home. "No point waiting," he said. I heard the words, my mind hazy, but this didn't surprise me. I felt a new disdain for them. Grandma was old, and even I knew to be there for her. Yet they repeatedly let her down. Maybe they weren't as wonderful as I thought. Maybe I was better than them. I returned home and came down with a fever. During my illness, an uncle visiting shared why they came back. The war zone they worked in was obliterated by shelling. The attacks were sudden, and reporters couldn't evacuate quickly. Many were injured. My parents stayed to capture the scene, delaying their own escape. Their closest friend, a photographer, died. Burdened with their friend's legacy, they refused to stop. After returning to regroup, they headed back to the front lines. Feeling guilty, they sent me and Grandma new phones and even called me. But we were strangers by then. The conversation quickly dried up. Before hanging up, Dad said to study hard, that they were waiting for me up front. My attention, though, was fixated on a little girl's voice through their phone calling Daddy. Yes, they adopted a colleague's daughter, Lucy. Just 5 months younger than me. Lucy was very unfortunate. Her mom died young, and now her dad too. My parents took her in, braving war's dangers. Later, perhaps out of love for Lucy, they returned to ensure her safe, happy upbringing. They left journalism, found secure jobs, settled in a city, and poured all savings into Lucy's life. Meanwhile, their mother and daughter, left behind in the village, was forgotten. Gradually, my rosy image of them faded. I stopped longing for their love and scratched journalism off my plans. Grandma noticed and often comforted me, saying, "No matter what, Grandma will always love you. So take care of yourself." When you love yourself, Grandma is happy. I threw myself into studies, hoping to make a better life for Grandma soon. But fate had other plans. In 11th grade, Grandma slipped in a puddle outside while buying groceries and fell. She told no one, continued living alone, and even promised over the phone to make my favorite pork ribs when I came home. But before the break, my parents returned to handle Grandma's funeral. They stood at the principal's office, with a tan-skinned girl beside them. As soon as she saw me, she snorted and turned away, a confidence I couldn't understand. My parents, dressed nicely, just stood there, and we had nothing to say. It was awkward, unfamiliar. Then they broke the news: Grandma was gone. They came to get me because it was Grandma's last wish, to take me to the city to raise me. In that moment, it felt like my whole world collapsed. I forgot how I cried and begged them to take me to see Grandma. But when I finally saw her, there was only a cold tombstone. They comforted me, saying without Grandma, I'd still have Mom and Dad. Their words were awkward and scripted. Lucy, who they adopted, was making faces at me from behind. Mom and Dad don't owe you anything. While you were living the good life, we were suffering in a war zone, she muttered, clearly jealous. That set me off. I ignored my parents' attempts to stop me and rushed at her, pulling out a chunk of her hair. Her scream pierced the silence of the cemetery. Then a sharp slap rang out. The mother, usually praised as a lady, looked stunned at her own hand, and then at my swollen cheek. She reached out to comfort me, but I turned away. Grandma's warm smile was in the photo behind me. I realized I was alone in this world. Even though I had found my parents, they had another daughter. They channeled all their guilt into her. They even hurt me for her. There's no point in hoping for their love anymore. From now on, I should love myself. In my dream, a kind and familiar voice said, they didn't know any better. They lost their best kid, and they'll regret it. I couldn't help but flinch, a tear falling. When I woke up, I felt empty, like all the emotions I'd had yearning for my parents were gone. I was calmer than ever. When the nurse saw me awake, she was thrilled. You're finally up. You've been out for 4 days, she said, and went to call my parents. She came back after a while looking awkward. Your mom was here earlier, but she's unavailable now. She'll come by later, she said. I knew why. Today was Lucy's parent-teacher conference. Lucy and I had been in a neck-and-neck battle over grades since junior year. In the last test, I finally took the first place she'd always held. Lucy claimed it wouldn't matter, that Mom and Dad would still prioritize her meetings. That made me challenge her to a hike, which seems silly now. Their love isn't tangible, but knowledge is. I've earned my rank, and don't need to compete with Lucy anymore. Mom finally came in the evening. The nurse had called her half an hour before, and she arrived with a cake, looking guilty. But when she learned I'd discharged myself, the guilt turned to anger. I didn't have a phone, money for a cab, or change for a bus, so I walked home. It was easy for Mom to catch up with me in the car. Before she even fully rolled down the window, she started yelling, Alice, why are you so inconsiderate? Do you even have manners, standing up your own mom? I waited for you all day, I said calmly. I have no money. You only paid for my medical and hospital fees. I'm hungry, so I'm walking home. Surprised at my honesty, she hesitated before calling me into the car. I obliged, and from the front seat, she awkwardly offered, I got you a gift to make up for it. Don't be mad over something small. I looked around calmly, my gaze landing on the cake box. Looks like Lucy did well today. Is this her reward? I asked. Caught off guard, she inhaled sharply, about to burst, but she paused, seeing my impassive expression through the rearview mirror. No longer upset, just stating facts. Alice? She asked, unsure. I just gave a formal smile. By the time we got home, Dad had probably been informed about the day's events. Over dinner, he lightly scolded Mom to be more considerate, then glossed it over with, we were wrong, Alice. Don't be mad, we'll change. His voice hinted at guilt. No one mentioned my illness again. They wanted to move on. Once I might have felt wronged. Now I just wanted to focus on studying. I replied coolly, no reason to be upset over things that don't matter. Under their gaze, I ate slowly, then went upstairs to study. At around 9, there was a knock on the door. Alice, do you have a moment to talk with Mom and Dad? Dad's cautious voice called from outside, a first since I moved in. Frowning at my physics problem, I sighed no need. I politely refused them. They seemed determined though, insisting on talking. I know they thought I was mad about being ignored, and that a little sweet talk would make it better. But gradually they started to panic. They realized I actually didn't care about them anymore. I stopped waking up early to make them their favorite breakfast and tea. I didn't greet them good morning first thing every day. They used to say I was too harsh and needed to be more like Lucy, who knew how to charm our parents. But they still gladly accepted my gestures. Even now, they instinctively reach for the cup thinking it's filled with the coffee or tea I used to make, even though that's long gone. They assumed I was just sulking and tried talking to me a few times, but I turned them down. After a few attempts, they began to feel guilty. Dad, who never took anyone but Lucy to school, surprisingly asked if I needed a ride. I accepted it because senior year is hectic, and I didn't want to waste time taking the bus. Lucy threw a fit when she saw I got to ride in the car, refusing to go to school. In the end, my parents split the duties, each taking one of us. Mom found it a hassle since her work wasn't on the way, and after a few trips with Lucy, she started complaining to me. I didn't budge this time, pretending not to hear her. Over time, her looks at me became more and more dissatisfied, but I stopped caring what she thought long ago. Not having to please them, my life became peaceful and relaxed. One day, Lucy refused Mom's ride, demanding Dad take her. She thought Mom's annoyance with me meant that if Dad stopped driving me, Mom wouldn't bother either, leaving me to walk. But Mom surprised us by just telling me to get in the car with a stern face. Lucy was shocked, and so was I. On the way to school, Mom was distracted and accidentally rear-ended the car in front. When the big, tough-looking guy got out, she was visibly scared. She rarely drove other than to take us, and the accident rattled her. While she fumbled with her phone to call Dad, I got out, grabbed the phone, and calmly called the insurance, negotiating with the other driver. She watched the whole thing, often trying to say something but stopping. Fortunately, the driver was accommodating, unlike some folks back in our village. The incident ended without much trouble. Since then, Mom's gaze shifted from disapproval to something like admiration. That evening, she recounted the story at dinner. Dad, hearing it, was full of praise for my calmness. They didn't hold back on the compliments, piling food onto my plate, and inquiring about school. I wasn't interested in answering, so I pushed the food aside, finished my meal, and left them at the table to study. My indifference didn't discourage them. If anything, it piqued their curiosity more. Discovering one good trait in me, they acted like they'd opened Pandora's box of intrigue. They used to think I was dull and uninteresting, but now saw depth. They learned I excelled in school, aimed high, and enjoyed helping classmates, holding a good reputation. I kept our home spotless, cooked well, and even dabbled in knitting and gardening, skills I picked up living with Grandma. Suddenly, what they thought was boring turned into maturity. They started observing me constantly, like now, when Mom noticed me with an old photo album, sounding surprised. It contained every news story they ever wrote, carefully cut out and preserved. With print media's decline, even they'd struggled to find copies of some pictures. But everything was here. Alice, did you collect all this for us? She asked with a shaky voice, reaching to hug me. I dodged, not expecting that. She awkwardly wiped away a tear and, convinced I was doing it for attention, eagerly shared with Dad what she'd found. But she didn't know I was planning to throw it away. 3 days later, they found it at the junk stand by our building. When Mom confronted me, I calmly said I was going to toss it in the trash, but it was picked up. I'll throw it farther next time. That set off an argument that ended with Dad stopping Mom from hitting me. As he ushered her out, he glanced back at me. I ignored him and got back to my vocabulary drill. Whatever they discussed after that, they paid more attention to me. It didn't sit well with Lucy, who acted out, trying to pull the spotlight back. It didn't work well. Her grades started slipping. She was smart but always needed their coaxing to stay on track. With her focus shot, she was falling behind fast. Finally, with just 3 months left until the college entrance exams, her parents noticed her slipping. That day, Lucy was crying when they picked her up from school. Her homeroom teacher had called her mom in for a chat, warning about Lucy's current situation. For Lucy's mom, who was used to hearing only praise, this was the first time she felt publicly humiliated, so she couldn't help but say a few harsh words. But it was an involuntary comment about why Lucy couldn't be more like Alice that really set Lucy off. She cried nonstop. Seeing her like that, her mom panicked and just brought her home. When we got back, Lucy stormed into my room and started trashing my things. By the time I walked in, it was complete chaos. Seeing me, her anger flared up again. "Get out! You're the outsider here," she screamed, red-eyed, as if trying to defend her territory like a lion. Mom and Dad just stared at her, not knowing what to say, their eyes eventually turning to me, almost pleading. What were they hoping for? That I'd say something to comfort Lucy, or maybe confess that I was indeed the outsider here. I looked at my parents, who at this moment still expected someone else to handle their problems. I couldn't help but scoff. These were the people who left their aging mother and young daughter behind to chase dreams. The same people who, feeling guilty, spoiled their colleague's adopted daughter during vital formative years. They've always been naive and cowardly, selfish at the core. They might be good journalists, but they weren't folks I should admire. Grandma, you were right. They aren't worth my love. I should keep that love for myself. I said nothing more and stepped over the mess to grab a few clothes. Packing my essentials, I turned to leave. Alice, where are you going? Mom called after me. I'm moving to the dorms, I said without looking back. Lucy's right. This was never my home, and you're not my parents. There's no need for me to stay. What do you mean by that? Dad, who hadn't said much until then, suddenly raised his voice. I ignored him and quickly left. Alice. Mom chased after me. It was the first time she spoke to me with a trembling voice, perhaps realizing this time, I really meant to sever ties. I know you're upset, that you think we ignored you, but we know we were wrong and we're trying to change. Both you and Lucy are our daughters. Why can't you just get along, no? I interrupted firmly. It's because of your indulgence that Lucy is greedy, and because you failed to treat us equally. With parents like you, we'll never get along. Her face turned pale. It was the first time she heard such blunt words from me. She still wanted to say something, but I cut her off. If I had a choice, I wouldn't want to be your daughter at all. It'd be better if you only had Lucy like before. With that, I turned and left without waiting for a response. This time, I walked away feeling light. The love I had longed for, which turned into a chain during 17 lonely years, finally gave way to freedom. From now on, love yourself, I told myself internally. Live more vividly, even for Grandma's sake. Transferring to live at school was easy. I just told the teachers I needed to focus. Being one of the few Harvard or Tsinghua prospects, the school was more than happy to help me. My homeroom teacher even offered her own dorm. Without having to face the family drama daily, I focused more intently on my studies, gaining more confidence as exams approached. Lucy, on the other hand, didn't bounce back. In fact, she got gloomier after I left. One day, she stopped me outside the dorm. Her eyes were red. You won, she said, almost choking on tears. Parents talk about you all the time, and blame me for driving you away. Are you happy now? I was the one who stuck with them abroad, suffered with them, not you. What gives you the right to take their love? But you were only there for 2 months, in a peaceful area far from any danger, I interrupted. You only remember your fear but forget they gave up everything, even their jobs for you. You focus on only yourself and ignore others' sacrifices. In a way, you all really fit together. You don't understand. Lucy shouted at me. My mom died early. My dad left me with relatives to go to war zones. For years I was passed around, looked down on. Finally, I had a home, people who cared, and you ruined everything. She was breaking down, crying in place. I just calmly looked at her and said, if you keep indulging yourself, the only thing you'll ruin is your own future. 5. She just wouldn't listen. Her eyes were red from crying. She said she was about to lose her home and asked what future she has. Hearing that, I didn't say more. I walked around her, headed back to my dorm. As I was leaving, she tugged at my shirt, sobbing, begging me to promise not to go back. I'm begging you, Alice, she said. They only think about you now. Every day at home, seeing you or anything related to you makes them cry. I admit I'm not as good as you, but I'm really scared. Please don't come back. I looked down at her squatting on the ground, begging like this. I couldn't connect her to the confident and bright girl I first met. Lucy was right. My parents truly regretted it. They've been calling me nonstop these days, even coming to the school looking for me. They dug out the gifts I once made for them. Sometimes they looked pained, other times surprised. Surprised by my creativity and talent. Sad because when they see me again, I won't even call them mom or dad. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and asked my teacher for help. I explained my family situation. The school took it seriously and talked to my parents a few times. and they stopped coming afterward. Lucy was true to her word. She only wanted the love of her home, not a future. The college entrance exams were coming, but she had her mind anywhere but studying. All she thought about was how to make her presence known to her parents. Even her teachers had given up, and her parents were ready to have her repeat the year. But Lucy didn't care. Her rebellion paid off. Her parents revolved around her every day, only having her in their thoughts and hearts. So, she pushed the limits of rebellion even further, exhausting both her parents and teachers. I couldn't comment on that, as I believed everyone had their fate. The college entrance exams came quickly. I stayed steady throughout. Walking out of the exam hall, I felt completely at ease. The questions didn't seem that hard to me. I had spent countless days and nights cramming to make up for the education gap between the town and city, and it all paid off now. I was confident about my scores, enough to get me into a top-notch university far away. Meanwhile, Lucy was a mess. She turned in a blank paper for math. Her parents have been sighing ever since they learned about it. They genuinely regretted everything now and missed me even more. They urged me eagerly to return, and this time, I didn't refuse. I needed to pack my things and say some things face to face. There wasn't much to pack. One suitcase was enough, half of it filled with memories of Grandma. The mittens she knitted when I was in elementary school, the exercise book she bought for me when I first got an award, and the storybooks she brought back after a long 30-mile walk to town. Each item was proof of how well I had been loved. "Once you leave, don't come back," Lucy said with schadenfreude, watching me the entire time to make sure I didn't take too much. But those two still asked me to stay as I was about to leave. "Let's go out for a meal," Dad said. "Consider it a chance for us to atone. Can you tell us about Grandma?" After thinking for a moment, I didn't refuse. The meal was set in a forest park, an outdoor picnic. Ignoring our mixed emotions, we sat together like an ordinary family of four. Seeing that everyone was gloomy, Dad took the initiative to break the silence. He started talking about how Grandma sold everything to send him to college, making him the only college graduate in the village. "I was born in the countryside, but she lifted me up. Your grandma was a wonderful person. Thanks to her, I had the courage and determination to pursue my dreams." Recalling her warm, kind face, tears welled up in his eyes. His voice choked a bit as he gulped down the drink. But I cut through his sad facade. "She lifted you up, but you left her in the countryside. You had the courage to pursue dreams, but left her to spend her final years alone. You're the most hypocritical person I've ever known." I stood, looking down at his flushed, drunken face. My anger had been simmering for a long time. Angry about Grandma's fate. Angry about them having me but not raising me. Yet that anger was often smothered by my craving for parental love. Until that high fever burned away all my feelings for them. Now I finally said aloud, "You're not fit to be parents or children, and I'm ashamed to be born into this family." "Alice, how can you talk to your mom and dad like that?" My mom cried out, standing up. She tried to persuade me, but was stopped by Dad. "Alice is right. I'm not a good father or son." He wobbled as he got up, scanning each of our faces before his gaze finally settled on Lucy. And suddenly he cried out loud, "Even stranded in the countryside, she raised you well. You're so excellent and sensible. But look at me, my daughter, who I've poured all resources into, has become nothing but a failure. How do I face her dead grandfather? Everything that happened recently wore him out, mentally and physically." He was crying his heart out, ignoring Lucy's now changing face. When I noticed my mom silently agreed with him, Lucy rushed in to argue with them. I had already said what I needed. I turned and left amidst the chaos. Just a few steps away, there was a woman's scream behind me. I turned back to see the grill toppled over, and the oil cans had fallen too, making the fire flare up instantly. Instinctively, I ran to the nearest fire station to grab an extinguisher. By the time I got back, my parents had snapped back to reality and were calmly putting out the fire. We worked silently together, and an almost disastrous fire with potentially serious consequences was safely extinguished. As the last flames died out, my dad's face was smudged with ash, but he didn't seem to care. He just watched me with an intense look. "She really is my daughter," he said, full of pride, always ready to fight alongside us. He reminisced about the time when he and Mom were in the war zone. 6. The thick smoke alarmed the forest rangers, and they called the authorities. On the way to file the report, he kept trying to sit next to me. Even after I refused, his intense gaze was all on me, like he had a lot to say. I ignored him, planning to leave once everything was sorted, but they were eager for me to stay. Dad said, "Alice, please stay. All we have will be yours one day." Mom added, "Aren't you about to choose your major? We can help guide you, get you into a better college. You want to study journalism, and our connections could be your resources." Dad chimed in again. "When you came to us, you were already quite grown. We thought you were set in your ways, but getting to know you recently has been a delight. Your determination is like Mom's, your calm reasoning like Dad's. You are our daughter, a wonderful gift from above." When I stayed silent, my parents looked a bit defeated. They said, "We're sorry. We were wrong to ignore you before, Alice. Please forgive us." Their eyes were sincere when they said it. Once I craved their parental love more than anything, but now that it was within reach, I turned it down mercilessly. "I don't need it," I told them. "I don't need your help. I don't need you. I grew up okay without you for 17 years, and I'll keep getting better. When I needed you most, you weren't there. You don't need to be part of my life now." They tried to protest that it wasn't intentional. This time, Mom was the one who spoke out, grabbing my hand with eyes full of pleading tears. "Alice, you don't know how happy we were when you were born. We wanted to give you the world as a gift. But they didn't treasure me. They had another child and gave her all their love. No, you never truly loved her either," I continued. "You just reveled in the sense of nobility from raising a colleague's orphan. You only loved yourselves." They fell silent, having nothing to refute. After a while, they spoke again but without the former pride, humbly asking, "Can't we have another chance? We did get along quite well recently, didn't we?" No sooner had they spoken than Lucy, who'd been eavesdropping outside, couldn't hold back anymore. She burst into the room, crying and making a fuss. "She doesn't want you. Why do you care about her? I'm your daughter." She threw a tantrum on the floor, making the scene chaotic again. Looking at this spoiled daughter, weariness covered my parents' faces. They once overindulged Lucy to avoid being accused of mistreating a colleague's orphan, and now they could only continue with their mistake. This lifestyle, this back and forth, would go on and on, for the rest of their lives. Seeing any well-behaved, outstanding child would remind them of what they lost. I went to a faraway college and cut off all contact after I registered. Maybe they still had hope for Lucy, so they started focusing on her continuing education. Mom even quit her job to help her, placing all their bets on Lucy's potential. Lucy promised she'd get good grades this time, and not let them down. Yet a year later, her results were still disappointing. She scored a mere 230, not even good enough for the local community college. When Mom went to the school to find out what happened, she learned Lucy had started dating a classmate. Retaking the year was tedious and stressful, and with additional emotional burdens, she plunged into the relationship like a moth to a flame at the first sign of affection. Having failed again, her parents didn't even blame her. They just had her prepare for another attempt. One night, Mom texted me from a new number, pouring out her regrets and sorrows. She lamented not cherishing me and not properly guiding Lucy. Now she'd even lost her job, and life had become a mess. During sleepless nights, she missed me, the daughter who once filled their lives with pride. I laughed. They preferred Lucy's brattiness back then. Now that it was backfiring, they missed my maturity and understanding. People like them, I would never trust their claims of love. Walking away is the smartest choice. Later, Lucy ran away after retaking classes for the third time, moving in with her boyfriend. This time, my parents didn't even report her missing. They just carried on as if nothing happened. A year later, Lucy returned, more erratic than before. She clung to home like a ticking time bomb, tormenting my parents day by day. She forbade them from mentioning me. If they did, she'd erupt into a fit. The more she did this, the more they missed me. Eventually, one day, Lucy discovered the letters Mom wrote me. In a fit of rage, she pushed them down the stairs. Dad became brain dead from the head injury. Mom recovered soon after but chose to put Lucy in jail. Later, I went on to graduate school, thriving academically. I heard from my parents again when Mom reached out. She said there was something they hadn't given me. Initially, I didn't want it, but I decided to go back. Seeing her now, I hardly recognized the once glamorous mother. She'd aged rapidly, hair graying, her posture hunched. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, trying to reach for my hand, which I evaded. Ignoring her sudden disappointment, I asked what she had for me. She handed me a vaguely familiar certificate. 7. That was the award certificate from a writing contest I entered during my senior year of high school. It got mailed back to me alongside the original essay during my freshman year of college. Big bold letters on the title read, "My father, my mother." Back then, I was writing about the parents I imagined truly loved me. My mom was smart and gentle. My dad was forgiving and kind. We had a happy family. She held the essay she'd likely read countless times, tears streaming down her face. "Alice, I know how to be a good mom now. Can you give me another chance? This time I'll truly love you, and only you." "That's not necessary. I once hoped they could love me, but now I don't need it. I'm independent. I can survive on my own, know how to make money, and how to take care of myself during the lonely times. That's how I've always lived. I won't be thankful to them." The sound of the door opening interrupted us, and in walked a familiar figure. It was Lucy. After being released from prison, she still lived with our mom. She has no diploma, a prison record, and can't find a job. She lives off our mother at home all day. When she saw me, she paused for a moment, then looked away, turning her gaze to Mom with a harsh tone. "Old witch, hurry up and cook. Do you want to starve me?" My mom didn't respond to her, just looked at me with a pleading face, hoping I'd stay and talk. But I gently pulled my hand away, not accepting her plea. Everyone's fate is their own choice. They chose to let their lives become this chaotic mess, stuck in the past with regret. But not me. I'll keep looking forward. The end.